Outside your door, a world awaits, a world of neighbors. Some of those neighbors live right next to you. God has placed you right where He wants you. You work with some of your neighbors. Others share common interests or activities with you, and God has placed them in your life for His purposes. Some of your neighbors live close, and others live far. Some you have not even met yet, but God has ordained a time and place for you to be their neighbor. The question is not, do you have neighbors? You have plenty. The question is, are you a neighbor? Are you a neighbor who tells and lives out the gospel to a world that desperately needs it?
A little over 2 years ago, we were blessed and honored to host a concert here for tornado relief, and that was initiated by Stephen Curtis Chapman, obviously hometown Paducah, coming back here to raise money, but had several other artists. The other kind of big headliner, I think, was Ricky Skaggs. And so before the concert took place, I got a call from my pastor friend, Jameis Edwards, over in Owensboro. And Jameis gave me a call and said, hey, we're coming down to the concert. My son and I are coming to the concert. And I wanted to know if you could, do me a favor. And I was like, well, what is it? What are you interested in here? And it was kind of not what I expected. He said, my son, 10 years old, Cruz is his name. Cruz is a huge Ricky Skaggs fan. Now, I don't know how many 10-year-olds are huge Ricky Skaggs fans, but Cruz was. And he said he's even got his poster up in his room. Like, that's how big of a fan he is. He's learning to play the fiddle and the mandolin and the guitar. Like, he loves bluegrass, and Ricky Skaggs is, one of his heroes. And so I don't always have a lot to do with the concerts. And I said, I don't really know how it's going to go, but we'll see. I'll do my best or whatever we can do to make that happen. So after the concert, I got with Jameis and I got with Cruz, and we went right back to this hall and had a chance for Cruz to meet Ricky Skaggs. I think we got a picture of them meeting together. Yeah, there they are together. And so I was so overwhelmed, though, and touched because, think about this. It is an honor, right? When you have a hero, what an honor it is to meet them in person, especially after you've heard their music, you've seen them, in other sort of media, but not meeting them in person. But that picture right there, I think, really kind of tells the story, because I sat back with Jameis and I watched him as a dad look at his son. And what was amazing to me, and I'm not getting any royalties for any of this that I'm about to say, so let me say that to you. But what was amazing to me was just the attentiveness that Ricky gave to Cruz. He sat and talked with him and listened to him and asked him questions, gave him pointers on playing instruments. And I remember specifically, he gave him a pick, right? A pick to play guitar, play a mandolin. And he said, don't lose this pick. This is not just any pick. This is a $50 pick, he said. He said, this is just a really special one that I want to give you. But what was amazing to me is how he just noticed him in such a way that Cruz just walked away feeling incredibly validated. And what I realized in that moment is that noticing somebody is more than just a physical act of having seen them and registering like who they are. To notice somebody is to truly take the time to be able to connect with them, to be able to listen to them, connect with their story, value their presence, and care about them that much. And as powerful it is for us to see somebody with their hero like Ricky Skaggs, when I think about the Gospels, isn't this true? Jesus was amazing at noticing, wasn't he? Like, he was just so amazing at noticing people. And y'all can take that picture down. But he had an amazing way. You think about, he's at a well one day, and there's a woman at the well. It's the last person he's supposed to be talking to. She has a terrible reputation. And here he notices her, initiates conversation with her. One day he's teaching, and there's a masses. And there's a guy named Zacchaeus. And he was a wee little man. A wee little man was he. He climbed up in a sycamore tree. Y'all remember the song, right? By the way, Zacchaeus will be the only person in heaven who's still angry. Because if you got called a wee little man throughout the ages, wouldn't you be angry too? You get to heaven, do not call Zacchaeus a wee little man. He will look at you and go, call me a wee little man one more time. He will come after you. I just mean, but he notices him up in the tree, doesn't he? There's a massive amount of people. Do you remember this? Do you remember Jesus walking and he felt the power go out of him as a woman touched his garment and he noticed it? He stopped and he noticed it. He noticed tax collectors. He noticed Matthew at the tax booth and then ate with a bunch of tax collectors. He noticed the prostitute. He noticed the sick. He noticed the people who were around him. He noticed children when everybody tried to keep them away from them. Like he just was good at noticing. But maybe one of my favorite stories is when Jesus is walking with a massive amount of people, and on the side of the road is a guy named blind Bartimaeus. So if Zacchaeus was a wee little man, Bartimaeus is now blind Bartimaeus to us, right? But he was blind and he's on the side of the road, and Bartimaeus wanted to be noticed. And so he yelled out, "Son of David, have mercy on me." And they all told him to be quiet. He didn't have time for you. He's got a massive amount of people, but he wouldn't quit. He kept on yelling it. He kept on yelling it. And it says in the passage that Jesus stopped. Now, before you go on, what does it take for an adult human being with lots to do to stop? Just to stop. It said he stopped and he turned to him and he went to him. He noticed him. And listen to me, this is not just a technique that Jesus has. He is embodying the gospel. Because what we have in the gospel of Jesus Christ is the God of all creation, who is the judge of all things, who is the sovereign over everything, is a God who looked down upon people broken and hurting and lost, and he heard our cry. Just like he did to the Hebrew children in Egypt. He heard our cry and he noticed us and he came to us. And if we're going to be about the purposes of Jesus, we're going to have to be the kind of neighbors that notice people. We're going to have to be the kind of neighbors that notice the people that God has put in our lives, because the gospel that he has brought to us in the way that he noticed us has been a training ground for us to notice others with that same sort of love, that same sort of connection. I want you to turn today to Luke chapter 10. Luke chapter 10. We finished cross culture last week, but it's our theme the entire year. But you know, as we looked at the worship schedule, we could spend weeks and weeks and weeks unpacking different aspects of what it means for the church to be a culture of the cross. But I'm gonna tell you, the reason we only gave 3 weeks to it is because we wanted to get the basics out and we wanted to get to work. We want to do something about it. We don't want to be people that sit around and talk about it. We want to do something about it. And one of the great questions that Jesus dealt with multiple times in his life is the question, who is my neighbor? The primary teachings of the Old Testament are to love God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. And even Jesus agrees with this. And to love your neighbor as yourself. But who is my neighbor? Who is the neighbor that I have to love? And we want to declare to you today that part of the mission that God has given us is that we would go about neighboring. Now, I know neighboring is a verb and not a noun, and I just made it up, right? Well, I didn't just make it up. We have it on the screen back up there. So you know we've had it for a little while. But what we want to say is that being a neighbor is an action point that we do. And part of it today, we want to suggest to you over the next several weeks, we're going to talk about what does it mean to go about neighboring. Because believe this. Here's the thing we want you to believe. That God has a purpose for your life. And he's put people in your life on purpose. And he can use you. You go, Nathan, I'm messed up. Yeah, they all were messed up that he used. You go, Nathan, I don't know that I have the ability. None of them were equipped. But he equipped them. And so today we want to say, what does it look like? If we're going to be a cross culture, we're going to go about neighboring. And that means noticing. Noticing. Probably a familiar story, but some of the details are not always familiar to us. Luke chapter 10, verse 25 says this, and behold, a certain lawyer stood up and tested him. Notice that he is testing Jesus. Not really coming with a fully sincere heart, wanting to kind of trip him up, right? Saying, "Teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life?" He said to him, "What is written in the law? What is your reading of it?" So he answered and said, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself." And he said to him, "You have answered rightly. Do this and you will live." Let me just be really clear on this with you, right? If you read the rest of the Bible, what you're going to find is Jesus has no confidence that this man could actually do this. That he could actually love God with all of his heart and love his neighbor as himself to fulfill all of the law. This guy has already overestimated his own righteousness. And so he says in verse 29, in fact, if we didn't know that, 29 makes it clear. But he, wanting to justify himself. Well, I want you to remember that because we're going to come back to it. He, wanting to justify himself, said to Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" And Jesus answered and said, "A certain man went down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell among thieves who stripped him of his clothing, wounding him, and departed, leaving him half dead." I don't know if you've ever been half dead, but I figured this: if there are two people who want you half dead, you're in trouble. Because there's only two halves of you. Is that not funny? I thought that was funny. I've had some people say, "I'm going to half kill you." I don't know which half they're going to kill. I don't know how that's going to work. All right. Now, by chance, a certain priest came down that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. Likewise, a Levite, when he arrived at the place, came and looked and passed by on the other side. So stop real quick. Notice that these two have titles that make them have status in the Jewish religious world. You have a priest and you have a Levite. These folks are religious people. They're Jewish people. This is one of their kind who has been beaten. They're on the road to Jericho, and we know between Jerusalem and Jericho is a road in which it could be very dangerous because the road was very winding. It went through some hill country and some mountainous country, so there's plenty of places for anybody to hide and to jump you any place. So it was a dangerous place, so it shouldn't be shocking to them. But I want you to notice that they actually looked at him and passed by. And let me just throw this out to you. Just to look alone is not noticing. If we look and pass by, we have not yet done gospel noticing. In fact, here's what he says in verse 33. "But a certain Samaritan, as he journeyed, came where he was. And when he saw him, he had compassion. So he went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine, and he set him on his own animal, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. On the next day, when he departed, he took out 2 denarii, gave them to the innkeeper, and said to him, 'Take care of him, and whatever more you spend when I come again, I will repay you.' So which of these 3 do you think was neighbor to him who fell among the thieves?" And he said, "He who showed mercy on him." And Jesus said to him, "Go and do likewise." Now, I think you maybe realize, but let me just reinforce to you, the Samaritans and Jews hate each other. Think of any racial, cultural rival that you can imagine. This is meant to shock. It doesn't shock, because when you hear Samaritan, it doesn't shock. But if I said to you that a Jew from a concentration camp stopped and helped an SS soldier, Nazi soldier, dying on the side of the road, you go, whoa, right? I mean, if you were to say that a black civil rights worker stopped and to help a white supremacist beaten on the side of the road, you go, wait a minute, something's happened here. We have certain rivals that we have seen in this world, and Jews and Samaritans cannot stand each other. So this is the shock of the story. The Samaritan is the last person that you would think would notice him on the side of the road. And certainly the Jew who's asking this question, the lawyer that's asking this question, does not think a Samaritan is righteous. And yet at the end of the story, he's the only one who has acted righteously. The others have not. Because why? Because righteousness is not in your title or in your race or in your status. It is in your character. It's in your heart. And he makes it clear, why is he righteous? And the answer is because he had mercy. Because he had mercy on him. So I want you to get this in your notes today. Noticing is more than physically being aware of someone, but includes seeing them as a person and taking the time to humanize them and connecting with their story. It's more than just going, I see you there. It's actually the time to stop and to get on board with it and to be a part of their lives and walk with somebody in a way in which the love of Christ and the truth of Christ is bestowed to them. So I grew up in Illinois. In Illinois, you had to take driver's ed. I don't know if you still do, but you had to take driver's ed to get your driver's license. And so I took driver's ed, and part of that was the driving portion of it, right? You had class time, but you also had time in the car. Any of y'all know the driver's ed car? Yeah, it's got the brake on the passenger side. You know what I'm talking about? It's got the brake over there. And so I remember getting in there, and they would have us go by twos. And this fellow I was with was driving, and we were driving down in Massac County. I still remember it. And the driver's ed teacher said, "You need to turn left," and he just freaked out. Like it was like in between, indecisive. And I'm not lying to you. The driver's ed teacher slammed on the brake, and we did a 180 in the middle of the road. I'm gripped back to my seat like this, scared half to death. And I'll never forget, it was Coach Osman. Coach Osman said, "Joyce, get up here and drive." I was scared half to death. I got up in the car and started to drive. Can you imagine that? Listen to me, my friends. When you become a neighbor to somebody, I'm going to tell you, you actually get in the car of their life with them, and it's not going to be easy. There's going to be some things that are going to be difficult. There's going to be some things that are challenging. There's a reason why it's easier to look and pass on. There's a reason why it's easier to look and not get involved and not neighbor and not get to know and not pray for and not listen to. There's a reason for that. But if you're going to be a neighbor, you got to get in the car. You got to get in car with the car of that person's life, and you've got to be able to walk with them. And noticing means taking the time more to go, what are your needs? What is broken about you? So ultimately, there's something in the gospel that includes noticing those in need of it. This is not, once again, part of our gospel. But get this, God has scheduled divine appointments for us with those spiritually left for dead on the side of the road. But will we notice, will we neighbor? So you got things to do this week. You've got plans. You got things scheduled already, and you're going to be going someplace. Listen to me, you go, "Well, Nathan, I'm not really going on a mission trip this week." Yeah, you are. You think you have to go to an airport and fly somewhere to go on a mission trip? Now listen to me, the mission trip is everywhere you go. Wherever you're at, you're on mission there. So you go to work, you're on mission. You go home and you have neighbors, you're on mission. Your kids are part of activities with other families, you're on mission. Right? Wherever you go, you are on mission. But I want to go even further with this. Isn't it fair to say that none of us in here would be a Christian if it wasn't for God creating a divine appointment for us to come in contact with somebody who would share the truth of the gospel with us? Amen? A divine appointment. Do you believe in those? Do you believe that as you go through life, God has scheduled appointments for you that you don't even know? And the question is, are you ready for them? Are you ready to be a neighbor? And the reality is, listen, I'm like such a hypocrite up here. Like I'm the worst at this. My wife is awesome at it. I am the worst at it. She makes friends everywhere we go. When I'm doing whatever, I'm like down, ready to get my task, ready to get going, and I'm passing by people who are neighbors. We go through the grocery line and we're buying stuff. My wife goes, "Hey, this is for my kids' party. They're turning 16 years old. We're going to go over there." They know everything about the party before we leave. And I'm like, I don't know that they care about the party. Doesn't matter. They're going to be friends. But listen, I'm going to tell you this. She notices people. She notices people. She notices what's going on in their face, what's going on in their hearts. And it's a gift that I see in her that is very lacking in me. How about you? How's it with you? Are you walking through life going, God could open a door for a divine appointment any moment. You notice the picture here that we have. It's a picture meant to be of a front door, right? And outside is a whole world, is a neighborhood, is houses, our cities. There's a world outside that we would go to. Listen, it's not just your front door of your house. God is opening doors with divine appointments everywhere you go. And the question is, are we looking for them? Are we noticing them? Are we walking with the Spirit in such a way that we're going, God, if you have somebody for me to stop and to listen and to care for and to walk with, then don't let me be so task-oriented. Don't let me be so focused on me and what I have to do that I walk right by, that I look at the person bleeding on the side of the road and I just pass on by. Don't let me do that. Let me notice. I'll tell you, listen to me. Here is what's killing, I think killing us, the part of human nature that kills us noticing others is we so long to be noticed. And in fact, I would suggest to you that the new currency of our culture is not money, and it's part of being in a culture of abundance, so that money is not as valuable to us as attention is. You know how I can prove it? 2 things: Jerry Springer and American Idol. The fact that anybody still signed up to go on Jerry Springer, are you kidding me? Don't come out of the soundproof booth. It's not going to be good, right? Just don't do it. But people would do what? They would put their worst, they'd air their dirty laundry just to be noticed. What do I say, American Idol? You know what we discovered on American Idol? Bad singing is more entertaining than good singing. Amen? Bad singing is funner to listen to than, anybody can listen to good singing. Just turn the radio on. You can hear good singing. But to watch somebody who's truly terrible that thinks they're good, that's entertaining, okay? That now you got me. Now you got me, all right? But what is it? We'll get out, we'll put me on TV. I don't care. I'm a terrible singer. I'll sing in front of everybody. It doesn't matter. Because why? Because attention and being noticed is our highest currency. And social media has put that on steroids. Notice me, notice me, notice me. But what it does mentally is it turns us inward. Emotionally, it turns us inward so that we are so focused about how we feel, how we think, how our day is going. And is anybody noticing that? We live with an entitlement that if people don't notice it, we get mad about it or we get upset about it because we need to be noticed. For instance, the cross turns us inside out. And in the cross, the God who was unnoticed by human beings noticed us and came to us and died for us. He noticed us to that level. He acted upon the cross. So what does it look like to do radical noticing? How does it happen in us? There's really 2 things that you have to do. The first one is this: radical noticing happens when we transition in focus of who qualifies to be my neighbor to a desire to be a neighbor. Look at verse 29. Verse 29 says this, and he, wanting to justify himself, said to Jesus, and who is my neighbor? And then you go to verse 36. This is how Jesus ends. So which of these 3 do you think was neighbor to him who fell among the thieves? Jesus changes the question from who is my neighbor to who was a neighbor, or who is a neighbor. Let me say it in a different way. You ask the wrong question, you get the wrong answer. And this guy's asking the wrong question. Love your neighbor as yourself. And he's saying, well, who qualifies to be my neighbor? And Jesus asked a completely different question. Not who qualifies to be a neighbor, but which one was a neighbor. Which means this: he is putting the responsibility of neighboring squarely on the giver, not the recipient. Do you all remember this? In Jesus, in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus said, you've heard it said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. Have y'all heard this before? Love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemy. Do good to them. Pray for them. Bless them. right? And you will be holy. You'll be perfect like your Father in heaven who makes it rain on the just and the unjust. He goes on to say that if you only love the people who are like you and who do like you, then you are no better than the heathen. I mean, heathen people love the people that love them. Gospel love is not gospel love until it's given towards enemies. And you know what Jesus does in this teaching? He broadens the term neighbor to include enemies. So who is our neighbor? Well, it's the wrong question. The question is, am I a neighbor? The question is, am I a person who goes about neighboring? Am I a person who notices and cares and speaks the truth of the gospel? Listen to me. The entire world that does not know Jesus is spiritually dead and dying and bleeding on the side of the road. Do we care? Or are we too busy deciding who deserves us to stop and notice and care for them? Or do we feel the responsibility to be a neighbor rather than to discern who deserves me to be a neighbor to them? See how Jesus, isn't he brilliant? You see how he turns the question upside down. As long as we're asking who has to be our neighbor, who qualifies, we're asking the wrong question. Because here's the deal. Because that is what God has done for us through Christ. The gospel is what turns you into a neighbor. God neighbored you through Jesus Christ, and now you have become a neighbor to seek out those who are lost and to bring them to Christ, to seek out those who are hurting and bring them to Christ, seek out those who are disillusioned and bring them to Christ. The neighboring that has happened to you has gone. It's core to our gospel. And grace broadens the concept of a neighbor to include enemies because it is an act of love that is gifted, not earned. It's grace. Neighboring is grace in action. And because it's grace, it's not earned by the person, which means this: you're free to neighbor people no matter how they act. No matter how they respond, no matter what they think, you are free to love and to not hate. You're free to return evil with good and not return evil with evil. That's Bible, you guys. It's not me. That's Scripture. And God has put people in your life. We have these boards up here with names. If you weren't here for Vision Sunday and didn't get a card, we would encourage you. I know there's some out in the front there with you, and there's 3 spots. And we're saying, put 3 names down of people that God has put in your life and pray for them. Look for open doors to care about them and walk with them, and open doors to share the gospel. That's what those cards represent. If you haven't done that, you can still go and place those there, and we'll put them up on the board. We'd love to do that. The question is, are we a neighbor? Are we a neighbor? Because here's the thing. Here's what neighboring does. It shares the love of God, because there's something about noticing that helps to validate a person's worth and open a lost person to the love of the Father through Jesus. God is using our noticing of people to soften hard hearts to the truth of the gospel. Because it is the gospel in action, indeed, embodied in our lives. I learned something about this. My junior year of college, I served as the youth and children's pastor at Parents Chapel Baptist Church in Bolivar, Tennessee, just south of Union University where I went to. And so I would go there on weekends and serve there. And let me just tell you, I discovered that it was a disaster. It was a disaster. And I wasn't good at it. And I thought maybe because my dad was good at it, it would just genetically come to me. But it didn't happen. I did learn during those years that maybe preaching was more my gifting and kind of where it's supposed to be. But I still remember going, and the church was going to vote on me, and the church unanimously voted to call me, which is great. It's an awesome affirmation, but maybe, afterwards, you really don't get much feedback about why. But I had a lady come to me, and she said to me, "Do you know why I voted for you?" And I originally thought, it's got to be the hair. I've got pastor hair. I mean, look at this, right? It's got to be the hair. I didn't say that. I said, "No, why?" And she said to me, and I didn't even know I did this. She said, "When I came and introduced you to my little boy, you got down on your knee and you looked at him face to face. See, I didn't know I even did it. But I said to her, yeah, that's part of my ministry strategy. Might as well just claim it, right? That's what I meant to do, right? I don't even remember doing it or having done it, but she said I kneeled down and got face to face, because what is she saying? There's something about noticing, going beyond looking and passing by, but stopping and being with somebody that validates them. And when we notice, listen to me, when we notice as Christians, we are communicating that Jesus notices them. Now, that's pretty important, isn't it? We are communicating that. So here's my question for you. Who has God put in your life to notice? One of the things we're going to encourage you to do every week of this neighboring series, we're going to have an action point, something for you to act upon to do neighboring, just so that we're collectively working together. And today, some of us have already started doing this, but there's an app called Bless Every Home, okay? And it's in your bulletin. Or your worship guide. There's a QR code on there. There's one on the screen there, wherever you need. But listen, here's what it does. This gives you names of your actual neighbors. Right? Now, maybe you live in a neighborhood where you know all your neighbors already, but most folks don't, I don't think. And it says, let me start praying for these people that live around me. That's all we're asking, is just to pray. But we collectively as Heartland would be able to see, we're praying for a lot of people in a lot of places. We want to encourage you just to start noticing who lives around me. Who has God put around me? Did you notice this? Did you notice that if you go back to sort of the rural farm agrarian era of the United States, when everybody, the cities weren't as populated as they are today, and you built a farmhouse, you built a big front porch, didn't you? Hello? Y'all seen Andy and Barney? They're out on the front porch, right? And the front porch, a sociologist would tell us, the front porch was this intermediate space between the private space of the home and the public space of everybody else. But it was in the front where neighbors could come and you could gather and you could connect with each other. And then somewhere when we started suburbs and houses like right next to each other, we started wanting privacy. And so somewhere around the 1940s, 1950s, what you see happening is now we have small front porches and we have big backyards. Now listen, I'm not worried about whether your house has, where the porch is in your house and all that sort of thing, but my question is, where is it at in your life? Are you a person who is ready to neighbor with people because God has put them in your life? Or are you a person who has receded? Let me just say this to you, okay? When we recede, not only are we not shining the light of the gospel, but listen to me, we are giving in to Satan's desire for us to isolate in ways that are going to emotionally be destructive to us. And God calls us to come out of the light. God calls us to shine the light of Christ. So the app is one of the ways that we're starting that today. The second thing, so we have to transition. We have to stop asking, who's my neighbor? And we got to say, God, make me a neighbor. What does a neighbor look like? How do we do that? Well, radical noticing happens when our eyes are wide open, when our heart becomes filled with gospel compassion. Verse 33 says this, but a certain Samaritan, as he journeyed, came where he was, and he saw him, and he had compassion. What is the difference between the first two and the Samaritan? They saw and they left. But what made him stay there was compassion. That he had mercy. In fact, the commentary of the lawyer at the end is the one who showed mercy on him. Listen to me. Noticing is not just an act of the eyes, it's an act of the heart. And if we try to go, I'm going to be neighborly to people, but we don't first have a transition or transformation in our heart to where the compassion God has given us is now being given to other people. We don't have a compassionate heart. Then I'm going to tell you, listen to me, that neighboring will come across manufactured. It will come across superficial. It won't come across authentic whatsoever. And beyond that, you'll just have one bad neighboring episode and you'll be done. But if your heart is filled with compassion, like the Samaritan it changes the way that you look at people. It changes what you see and how you see them. It has to be wide open. Compassion is more of a sick stomach than a sentimental feeling. So the first sermon I ever preached here at Heartland was voted on that day as well. Did not get a unanimous vote that day, but 4 of y'all, I still remember, okay? 4 of you. But on that day I preached about Jesus looking as a shepherd among the sheep who were scattered. And it said this, that he was moved with compassion. The word compassion there is the same word as compassion here. And you remember this? The compassion, the word for it, actually means your digestive system, right? Your stomach. So why would that be? Well, think about this. We think that emotions take place in the heart, but in the ancient world, they thought they took place in the stomach. And you go, well, that's kind of weird. Well, not really, because they all take place in your brain, by the way, right? But the reality is that when you are stressed, where do you feel it? When you have anxiety, you feel like you have a gut punch, right? When you get depressed, it affects your eating. It affects all that. So you can understand where they get that from. But what it was saying is this, that when Jesus looked at them, he was sick to his stomach about their vulnerability and their brokenness until he wanted to do something with it. See, I'm afraid we think the word compassion just means that we have some sentimentality and some passion for the people who are broken. Listen to me, sentimentality will not last you long. It won't. I mean, we can build it. We can build a guilt trip here today and go, oh, these poor people, and make you feel sentimental. But that won't last long. You know what will last long? Is a gospel that comes into your life that makes you sick to your stomach that there are people who need Jesus. Sick to your stomach that there are children who need love. Sick to your stomach that there's poverty that can just absolutely, in our world, that can ravage lives and destroy lives. Sick to our stomach about the brokenness in our world. And I would posit to you today that a sick stomach may be stronger than a broken heart. So I know I've shared this with you sometime before, but it's maybe been a while. But when I was in high school at Massac County, I took German class. And we had a German club. And at the end of the year, my senior year, we were going to take a trip to Six Flags. I don't know why, because there's nothing German there, I guess, but that's what you do. You go to Six Flags. We're going to Six Flags up in St. Louis. But I was kind of excited about it because, I know this is a shock to you, but look at me now. But I didn't do very well with the ladies back then, okay? Like I didn't get a lot of dates. I didn't have a lot of interest. And listen, when you have a trip to Six Flags, there's an opportunity to show off like a different side of yourself. You don't know. These girls get out of town, you never know, right? Like they might all of a sudden like you, all of a sudden. You may look different in St. Louis. I don't know how it works. But I thought, and I'll be honest with you, there were some fine looking Fraulein in that group, okay? And so like I was all excited about going to Six Flags, and we get to Six Flags, and I made 2 critical errors. Somebody sent me a text about this the other day, this ride. Does anybody here remember in Six Flags the ride, the Tom Twister? Okay, well, if you don't remember, let me just tell you what it is. It is a big circular room with a circular wall. You stand against the wall, and it spins until the floor drops out, and you're stuck to the wall like a mosquito on a windshield, right? And I'm going to tell you, it is just torturous. Well, maybe the Tom Twister I could handle, but you know what I did beforehand? I ate a funnel cake. Bad combination, right? Bad combination. When I got off the Tom Twister, man, I was so green. But I was like, I've got a reputation. Like the last thing I wanted to do was to throw up in front of my entire class, especially with all the girls that I was trying to impress, with that. That's the last thing that I wanted to do. So like, man, I'm holding it in. I'm just miserable the rest of the day. Not even to mention the wet socks and underwear from the water rides. And then you get on one of those big yellow dog buses for a couple hours. This is torture, my friends. your skin sticks to the actual vinyl. Y'all know what I'm talking about? And every bump that we're hitting, I'm just getting more nauseous and more nauseous and more nauseous till finally I go up to the bus driver and I say, you got to pull over. So he pulls over. I get out and I express my sick stomach all over the pavement. And I turn around and look. And there are 3 busfuls of high school students staring out the window, watching this entire thing. Let me say to you, ready? I didn't care. Because I'm going to tell you what, when you're sick to your stomach, you don't care about nothing else. Amen? Who cares about dates and reputations? Nobody, when they're throwing up, is going, how much is in my 401k right now, right? Nobody does that. When you're sick to your stomach, it is a motivation and a feeling that outdoes every other motivation and feeling you could possibly have. And when Jesus says he was moved with compassion, and it says this man was moved with compassion, it wasn't just that he was going, oh, I feel badly for the guy, let me help. I feel guilty if I don't go. Those are not gospel motives. He looked at him and he was sick to his stomach until he had to act upon it. Man, when are we going to get burdened for people who are lost like that? When are we going to get burdened and care that people are living and dying without Jesus and spending eternity in condemnation? I mean, if we say we believe that, then is there anything more important? Is there anything we should care about more? But what happens to our compassion? It gets diminished along the way. Our compassion is diminished as we experience wounds that make us bitter. You know what I find about wounds is that when I feel wounded, sort of like a sick stomach, it is so powerful in me, that's all I can think about. It's all I can see. That's all I can focus on. How do I feel? How have I been wounded? How do I get fixed? And what happens to us, especially if we hold on to bitterness, what happens to us is it diminishes our compassion. It has a way of eroding our compassion. The second one is fatigue that makes us empty. Friend, listen to me. You serve Jesus, it's hard work. You're going to get tired. You're going to get let down. You're going to need Sabbath. You're going to need Jesus to wash your feet. You're going to need to be restored and need to be rejuvenated. Because if you don't, you're going to have compassion fatigue. And in that fatigue, you're going to be empty of compassion. You're going to say, I have given and given and given, and I have no more to give. You know what? You need to go sit at the feet of Jesus and let him fill your tank again. Instead of being bitter and just saying, I'm done with it, you need to recognize you're human too. And you need it. And the last one is this, just the guilt that makes us forget grace. Here's what I find. I find that when I am stuck in my own self-critical guilt and not liberated from it by the forgiveness and grace of Jesus, and I'm just beating myself up, what I find is this crazy. It sounds really crazy, right? But the lack of compassion that I have for myself bleeds over to a lack of compassion for other people. Love your neighbor as yourself. What if that's not just prescriptive? What if that's descriptive? What if that we cannot give a grace that we have not yet received? What if we cannot love with a love that we have not received? And this is how the gospel works through us. So all that comes down to this. This man, this lawyer who asked this question, hear this, okay? He has a heart issue. He has a spiritual issue. But listen to me, he has a gospel issue. He has a gospel issue. Go back to verse 29. I know I've said it a couple times. I told you we're coming back to it. But he, wanting to justify himself, said to Jesus, and who is my neighbor? Listen, can I tell you the good news of Jesus Christ? The good news of Jesus Christ comes to those who knows that they cannot justify themselves. It comes to those who know that they have fallen short of the glory of God and they are not righteous, but they are sinful and been stained by their sin. But that in spite of that, God loves them so much to send Christ to bear the punishment and to bear the debt of their sin so that they no longer bear it any longer, and it has been transferred upon them, from them upon Jesus. This is the gospel. Self-justification is the anti-gospel. Self-justification, self-righteous religion is the opposite of the gospel. Do you realize in the story of the prodigal son, there are two lost people. There's the rebellious one and there's the righteous one. And they both need the Father. They both need to come home. But in the end, it's the one that's rebellious and broken that comes home and the one that's righteous that goes away. He has a gospel problem. His lack of compassion is not just a matter of reorganizing his life, it's a matter of transforming his heart. So that the gospel that has come to him has affected him to the degree that he is now compassionate for other people. I've said to you many times before, the true measure of how much grace is in you and working in you is not how well you can describe it, but how much you give it. And man, are we okay? Are we okay being a spiritual social club that gathers together and just glories in the benefits that we have of knowing Jesus? Or do we want to be a culture of the cross that is busy neighboring the people God has ordained for us, looking for doors to open, to walk through that God has given us? For that to happen, it has to be fueled by the gospel, not by guilt. But we have to become captured with Christ. We have to fall so in love with Jesus that his compassion flows out of us. Our compassion is fueled by the compassion of Abba, our Father, toward us through Jesus Christ. And self-justification will produce guilt, but it will never produce enduring compassion. So, I don't know why I'm giving lots of growing up stories today, so that's kind of where I'm at, I guess. But growing up in church, anytime there'd be a message like this about mission, about evangelism, about caring about the lost, caring about the people, I can remember feeling so guilty about it and determining I was going to go out and share the gospel with somebody. I remember one day there was a friend that God put on my mind that I played basketball with, and I had basketball practice the next morning, and I went to him, and we were just like shooting around, and I was just like, "You need to be saved." I just ran off. He don't know what I'm talking about. That's not neighboring. And you know what happened to me is I said, "Okay, Lord, see how good I was?" It eased my guilt, and I was done. Because it wasn't something that was a part of my heart. I did not take compassion on him. It wasn't my compassion and my love for him. It was my guilt. Friends, easily this sermon could just make us feel guilty, but that will go away before we're done with lunch. But what if we became so enamored with the compassion that God has given us through Jesus, and we noticed around us those who need it and felt sick to our stomach about it and said, we have to neighbor. Listen, you don't have to go neighbor the whole world. I almost think we make a mistake by telling kids, you need to go out and change the world. That's a lot to ask. But you know what you do need to change? Listen, you need to change your world. The world God's given you. The people he's put in your life. You don't have to go find people. They're already there. And so here's what we're going to do in our invitation time as we start. Today starts with prayer. It really does start with prayer. You go, well, prayer is just those things we do to get to the next thing. No, it's not. Man, two things we're asking Heartlanders to do. Two things we're asking Christians in this room to do. The first is this, that you would pray for a heart of compassion. If you say, I'm going to try to be compassionate, you will fail. But if you come before God in a gospel posture that says, God, I lack compassion, but you can give it to me, he'll give it to you. So let's ask him for it. Let's pray for it. Let's pray for a heart of compassion individually and collectively as a church. And the second thing, Christian, I'm asking you to do is, who has he put in your life? Would you come today and pray for them? Would you pray for some of them their salvation, some of them who have wandered off to come back? Some of them who you know are just barely hanging by a thread and hurting, and they need love and power and strength. Come today. Would you bow with me, please?